all. Dr. Shaji Thomas John, Dr. Ashraf, Dr. Ashok Kumar, Dr. Balachandar, Dr. Shabia Shandana ma'am, Dr. Nihas, and my dear postgraduate students. We are very happy to have you all today for this session, a session for postgraduates on child sexual abuse. We are privileged to have ma'am, Dr. Shabia, she's a very senior consultant gynecologist at Bangalore and a co-founder of Enfold Proactive Health Trust, to detail us on the examination of a child with alleged sexual abuse. We all know that when we were postgraduate students, we were interested in patients' clinical cases that would appear for our examination, postgraduate examination. So naturally, postgraduates do not have an insight into problems like child sexual abuse. But unfortunately, in the outpatient departments of teaching hospitals, at least, both in the gynecology department as well as in the pediatrics department, especially when pediatricians are seeing adolescents also. So many of these cases come for the first time. And we all know that it is important to know a detailed, thorough clinical examination and reporting of the victim, of the who is involved in this thing, is very important. Unless the case will not have a standing in the court. That's how many of the cases are going against the victim due to lack of proper documented evidence. So we thought the postgraduates should have a good knowledge about these issues. And Protect Child Rights is the theme of IAP Kerala for the year 2020. And we are having this week as the Child Right Week celebrations. Tomorrow is the International Child Rights Day. So it was the idea of Dr. Ashok Kumar that we should include postgraduates also for this program. And he has arranged everything for this program. And I'm very happy that we have excellent faculty also for the program and a good number of postgraduates attending from all over India. So I'm very happy to formally declare this session of webinar inaugurated. Wish you all happy learning and teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Narayanan. Now I invite Dr. Balachandar, Dynamic Secretary of IAP Kerala, for felicitation.
Sir, happy to see that Shaji Thomas sir and team Kozhikode could take up this topic among PGs, and I am sure their interest will be more on other topics. But I can tell you that when you start practicing, this topic will be your first priority in your mind, because that is the situation in our country now. You can hear from the news daily. So we are proud of our president who has chosen this topic in his presidential action plan, which is the need of the hour in Kerala's advancement in childcare scenario. And this is the first time we are celebrating Child Rights Week over a period of 7 days. We are around 20 activities, 15 to 20 activities over a period of 1 week, 10 days. And we all know children have the right to health, education, and comfortable living. And above all, they should be prevented from all 3 forms of abuse: physical, mental, as well as sexual abuse. And we have successfully cut down the mortality and morbidity of pneumonia, deaths due to pneumonia, malnutrition, everything, diarrhea. And also we are in the path of enabling the disabled. Now it is the time to prevent abuse in children and adolescents, and they need to be supported when it comes to the matter of rights of the child. And it is our collective effort, job to think, learn, and improvise for the betterment of our children. So I wish, with these words, I wish this program all the success. Thank you. Jai Hind, Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Balachandar. Now I invite Dr. Neha Sneha for vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Respected President Ashraf sir, Chief Guest of the Day, and Narayan sir, and all of the dignitaries. I like to thank initially and appreciate the efforts of our dear State President Narayan sir for conducting this week celebration about child rights in a very big way this time. And I think this is for the first time we are conducting such a week celebration, which is very important. And I also thank the state OB, Narayan sir and Bala sir, for giving us 2 functions in this week. One is for today, and also tomorrow also we have a function on Child Rights Day, and that program is also at 3 p.m. So again, I thank Narayan sir for being here and inaugurating this function. Also, our dear Shaji Thomas sir, being part of IIP Kozhikode and IIP Kerala, sir is the backbone of this program today. Thank you, sir, for arranging this program for IIP Kozhikode and IIP Kerala. And I also thank Bala sir, our dear secretary, for being there for everything and arranging everything. And I also thank Ashok Kumar sir for arranging this week and the master brain for these programs. I thank today's speaker, dear madam, for joining us today. We know she is a senior consultant gynecologist from Bangalore. Thank you, madam, for joining us in between your busy schedule today. Thank you all of the participants and PGs joined us today. I think without much delay, we'll go for the sessions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Nihas. Now we are moving to the scientific session. Today's session is management of child sexual abuse. I request Dr. Ashok Kumar. We all know he's a rare breed of pediatrician who is always interested in child rights issues and social issues faced by children, as well as he's maintaining that interest. That is more important. So often we will have an interest in a topic, but we will not keep it maintained. But Ashok Kumar is maintaining interest in such issues always. I request Dr. P. Ashok Kumar to give an introduction to the topic, as well as to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Shoiba Saldana. Over to you, Dr. Ashok Kumar.
Shall I start the screen sharing? Is screen visible?
It is visible. It is visible. You are audible. It is visible.
Thank you, Dr. Ashraf and Dr. Shaji and other people for arranging this wonderful program. And I also recognize the presence of Dr. Sandhya Kapse Madam, who is the chairman of ICANCEL in the attendees. And if Shaji can allow her in the later part to be a part of the discussion, it will be better. Dr. Sandhya Kapse. Good afternoon to all. Do you know what is the importance of today? That is October 19th. October 19th is the World Day for Prevention of Child Abuses. 20th is the day of Child Rights Day, but today is the day for prevention of child abuses, and we selected this day for giving a program for the postgraduates on child sex abuse, and appropriate thing, because over the years we are observing a lot of problems related to child abuse, especially child sex abuse. And as Dr. Narayanan already said, that there is not much exposure to the postgraduates for the need or the understanding of child sex abuse. So my purpose today is to give an introduction to child sexual offense. Not an introduction to child sexual offense, but an introduction to recognize, respond, and report cases of child sexual abuse. Now, the program has, the objective is that understanding sexual violence against children, understanding the dynamics of child sex abuse. I will cover these in another 8 to 10 minutes. And later on, Dr. Madam Shoiba Saldana will be talking to you on how to recognize a case of child sexual abuse and how to diagnose a case and report a case. Now, definitions are always very difficult thing. So many things will be there and you will not understand. But still, you have to have a definition. WHO 1999 consultation in child abuse prevention quoted this definition as an involvement of a child in any sexual activity that the child does not understand, the child is unable to give informed consent, or the child is not developmentally prepared or cannot give a consent, or it violates the law of or norms of the society. It can be, it's not limited to inducement of consent of child to engage in an unlawful sexual activity, use of child in a prostitution, exploitative use of child in pornographic performance and materials. Now, if the definition goes like that, what are exactly these the offenses? There are a list of offenses which we can say, starting from actual or attempted penetrative sexual intercourse to letting the child watch or hear an act of sexual intercourse. So many things are there. Since the passing of POCSO Act in the Parliament in 2012, the offenses are divided or segregated or grouped into these groups. That is penetrative sexual offenses or penetrative sexual assault, where earlier, as you all know, that the vaginal intercourse was only considered as a rape. But in this act, any object, need not be penis alone, any object introduced into any opening of the child or person can be considered as a penetrative sexual assault. And if there is no penetration, it is called sexual assault. And any other activities like molestation, other tasting, etc., is considered as sexual harassment, and pornography is another area. And there are another two terms here, that is the aggravated penetrative sexual assault and aggravated sexual assault. If the assault or the abuse has been done by a person who is in the responsible position, who is having the trust of the child, like that is that of a parent, grandparent, or a teacher, or a police person, or a doctor. In those situations, it is considered as a, because they are supposed to protect the child. In such a person is doing the offense, this is considered as an aggravated problem, offense, and they are punished double than that of the usual, the other punishments. So we look at the worldwide incidence or prevalence. So this is an old slide, but still the prevalence is almost the same, varying from 10 to 20% in many of the countries. Now, child sexual abuse can occur in a variety of settings. It can be at the home, it can be at school or workplaces. Now, of late, we have seen that transport vehicle is also a place where abuses can take place. And it can take place in the family, can be done by a parent, even step-parent, a sibling or other relative. It is almost always, in 90% time, it is a person who the child knows. It can be a friend, can be a neighbor, a child caregiver, or a teacher, etc. The offenders comes from all walks of life. And he cannot be picked up. He cannot identify who this person is going to be a child abuser. No, abuser. No. And even healthcare providers can be a group as such, maybe can do the abuse in some situations. Now we look at the this again one old study by Government of India, probably largest study with 13 states and 12,447 children. The different forms of child abuse varies from 66% of physical abuse to 50% of sexual abuse, 50% of emotional abuse, and about 60-65% of child neglect. The main problem is that 72% said that they did not report the abuse to anyone. So the abuser is not being identified or punished in 72%, and only 3% is reported to the police. This is mainly because most of the cases it takes place in the family premises or inside the family. So the persons may not be, or the parents may not be interested to go to the police or officials because they have social reasons. Now, this is a age-wise incidence of severe forms of sexual abuses. As I already said, 53% of Indian children experiences some form of child sexual abuse. 20.9% severe sexual abuse. Here you can see that most of the incidents takes place between 12 to 15 years child period. And it can take place, as I've already said, in home, school, workplace, anywhere. Person who are known to the child or may not be known to the child. Now, what are the risk factors on child abuse? So, a lot of factors can affect. At the individual level, a disabled child is more prone to any form of abuse, especially sexual abuse, because they cannot resist it. And even serious physical and mental illness. The temperament of the child is also important. Then the aggressive behavior of the child. In child with aggressive behaviors and attention deficit. There are so many parental factors also. As such, parents are the people who should be, the proper parenting will prevent a lot of cases of child sexual abuse. But if the parental background or the family background is not that much satisfactory, if there is marital discord, domestic violence, or poor parenting, young age parents, substance abuse and alcohol abuse in children houses, and mentally or physical disorders of parents, and if there is a history of the child trauma in the parents also can be a contributory for child sexual abuse in the children. Now there are a lot of community and social factors like poverty, gender and social inequality, discrimination, and even now in the present situation, the neighbors, the transient neighborhood is also important. Earlier, when you live in an area with as a community, people know each other. Now we don't know, and easy availability of drugs and alcohol is another factor. Now social factors, glorifying violence towards others is also, and in the role of media, role of movies are also very much seen as a point in this context. And a poor parent-child relationship, existence of child pornography, all leads to more incidents of child sexual abuse in our place. Now, we know that the children are vulnerable for many things. And in this case also, the immaturity in their experiences. So that they can be confused, they can be controlled or coerced, and they may not be able to interpret or understand what is the intent. If it is a person close to your family, if the person is known to you, what is their primary intent, we don't know. Only the child will understand the seriousness only when the actual abuse takes place. And many a time our socio-cultural norms mandate that the child respect and listen to others. So they will not tell others. If say that if you tell this to anybody, I will kill you, and or you should not, I will hurt your family members. Then naturally they will not, they will be afraid of telling others, and they may not even cry out or struggle because of fear of disapproval or punishment. All these points, all these things are taken as an advantage by the person who commit sexual offenses. Now, one thing you have to understand, that is child sexual abuse does not occur all on a sudden. A person who are intended to do a sexual offense in a child, they plan it for a long time. They groom the child. They groom the child in such a form, such a form that they build trust in the child, and also the adults in the around the child to gain access to the child. So it will reduce the likelihood of disclosure, or even if the child say that this person has abused me, the family members will not accept it, because she was so close or so lovingly reacting to the child for all so many days. And how can this person hurt this child? And it reduces the likelihood of being detected, and it manipulates the others. The others never consider the child as telling the truth, and this will make the child to a cooperative and complacent partner. And there are different stages. These people first target a victim. They gain trust. They identify the child, and they gain trust by being very close and give some benefits to him, some toys, sweets, and all. They will feel a need in their family. Say, for example, if there is some financial needs or something like that, he put himself as a person in that helping hand, so that he will have a say in every matter in that family. And finally, they isolate the child from the others and uh, going for the sexual activity. And moreover, even after the sexual activity, they maintain the control so that the child will not go to report such problems. So the grooming behaviors also varies. I don't want to go into the details of that. Now we have to see that what is the consequences of sexual offense. What happens to the child? Experiences of sexual violence in childhood can have an adverse consequence for the child, for physical, mental, as well as social development. And the consequences depends on the duration of abuse and age of the abuse, and the availability and type of support which help the child to get back to the normal stage. And it can be in the form of physical abuse. As you know, you can have injuries due to violence. Trauma can be there for genital organs, other places. And sexually transmitted disease can take place. And even you can have a teenage pregnancy. These are the main physical consequences. But more important is the consequences of sexual offenses, behavioral or psychological consequences. It varies from risk of self-harming behaviors and even go up to committing suicide. Adverse child experience study was a major study conducted in US, examining the effects of adverse childhood experience on the adult health and well-being. It has seen that a powerful relationship has been established between emotional experience during the childhood and physical and mental health during adulthood. It could leave a lasting impact on health of any person at any age, not in the childhood alone. And sexual abuse suffered in childhood is associated with a broad range of behavioral, psychological, and physical problems that persist even into the adulthood, which can be anxiety, depression, post-traumatic depression, self-destructive behavior, dissociation, substance abuse, sexual maladjustment. Even in their future relationship, it may affect, and a tendency towards re-victimization takes place in a subsequent relationship. And this is a study conducted by in Kerala earlier in the prison. They have seen that 59% of females in prison, 85% of teenage prostitutes, 60% of teen mothers, 43% of adolescent runaways, 53% of reported substance abuse, and 68% of individuals in substance abuse families has some sort of childhood sexual abuse experience. So, adult survivors of childhood physical or emotional or sexual abuse has an increased risk of depression and other mental health disorders. And moreover, new evidence suggests that they are likely to suffer physical disorders, even like heart disease and obesity are the potentially fatal physical conditions. So, it is imperative that a kind of right intervention and opportunity for recovery should be given to these children in appropriate time. So, as doctors, as postgraduates and pediatricians doctors, it is our responsibility to see that these problems are identified and rectified in appropriate time. Now you look at what is the role of healthcare professionals as per the POCSO Act. Since we are medical professionals, our primary aim always should be treating the child and curing the disease. And immediate care of the victim should be our first preference. And at the same time, you have to obtain a medical history in a facilitating, non-judgmental, empathetic manner. And you have to meticulously document the historical details and detailed examination to diagnose, to collect forensic evidence. You have to testify in a court of law. And you have to, moreover, your main aim should be to give appropriate medical and psychological support. As pediatrician, we have another job to prevention, advise children. Pre-guidance also should be given through health education classes. How can we prevent such activities? So I just gave an introduction to what is basically child sex abuse and why we should, as a doctors, we should know about it. We should be able to identify cases of child sexual abuse and how to examine, properly manage the child. For enlightening you all on this topic, we have Dr. Shoiba Saldana. Madam is primarily a gynecologist by profession. She was working as a gynecologist, but her interest was mainly in training people. Along with her colleague, she founded Enfold Proactive Health Trust in Bangalore, which is doing a lot of educational programs, and training for stakeholders like doctors, judicial officers, police officers. And she's with us. I think I can say that she's partner of iCancel for a long period of time. And she will be talking to you on how to identify. And the term I always appreciated, that empathetic way of approaching a child. That is the more applicable thing especially in child sexual abuse. I also acknowledge the presence of Sandhya Kapse, madam. Madam, welcome you to this program. Over to Madam Shoiba, madam.
Thank you, Ashok. Good afternoon, Dr. Sandhya. Nice to see you. So I'm going to start off immediately because we have already taken up time. Dr. Ashok, thank you so much for the introduction you've given because you've made my life very easy. You've spoken about what are the effects of child sexual abuse and the way a child is groomed. And that grooming becomes very important when we're talking about the fact that children are normally assaulted by somebody close to them. And so it's very difficult for the child to be able to talk about it. I wanted to just mention one more thing, that today, November 19th, is, besides being World Day for Prevention of Child Sexual Abuse, happens to be International Men's Day. And congratulations to all the men in our lives and all of you here. But what I would like to have is conflating these two, because very often men are looked at perpetrators of child sexual abuse, but not the victims too. And the study which Dr. Ashok had mentioned, the national study 2007, has found that there were more boys than girls. Like in studies, they've said 52% boys, 49% girls. This is approximately the numbers of children who have faced sexual abuse in India. And I think it's essential that we look at it for understanding that boys are as much victims, and also that women can be perpetrators. As a doctor, one of the greatest things about POCSO, which has come in now, as compared to earlier 377, 376, 375 of the Indian Penal Code, just talked about rape and sodomy. So it was peno-vaginal assault and peno-anal assault. And so therefore, if you look at the traditional way judges, lawyers, and even doctors, senior doctors used to look at cases, was, is there a trauma? Is there a damage to the anus? Is the anus torn? Is the vagina torn? And unfortunately, the importance of the hymen was excessively overemphasized. And because of that, people would write things like hymen is not damaged or hymen is damaged, and no anal injury seen. And that was considered, the judge would then decide that that means there has been no assault. POCSO has changed that, because we know that sexual assault can be many, many different ways. It can be molestation, it can be any sort of penetrative and non-penetrative act. So there may not be injuries, and they have studied and found that only 37%, so they had done a study in Australia on 100 cases of rape, where the rape had happened, and of them only 37% actually had trauma or injuries. The rest did not have any injuries, though rape had taken place. So we have to understand that as a medical officer, while it's important for me to examine the case, it is very, very important for us to take an interview and take the history and write down whatever is there, understanding that there may not be injuries, and that does not mean that assault has not taken place. The second thing I would like to mention over here is that when we talk of, it's very important to examine a child holistically. I know that after I finished my MBBS and my MD in gynecology, I had no idea how to examine a child or even a woman who had come with sexual assault. Unfortunately, for the simple reason that we were never taught much. In forensic medicine now, forensic doctors are now taking sessions for the students and during internship about how to examine a child, but originally we had no idea. And it took me a long time to learn. And the first thing we start learning from it is, if I have a child who has come to me with sexual assault, suspected or reported, I find that if the child is 9, 10 years or younger, we are very, very caring and considerate. We talk to the child, we feel sorry for the child. But the moment it's a teenager, 15, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, we become extremely harsh and judgmental. All of you have been through teenage. Please don't tell me you didn't have romantic feelings, you didn't have crushes, you did not take chances, you did not do things which may have been stupid and risky. You definitely would have. You do not deserve to be judged for that. And for a girl or a boy who have become romantically inclined, and sometimes the family system, as Dr. Ashok had mentioned, parenting skills are very important to prevent abuse. In a family where there is a lot of conversation about relationships, respect, consent, sexuality, the children feel comfortable to talk to their parents, and it's very rare that they would run away or elope. But in so many cases, in so many families which are extremely patriarchal, very controlling, some of the ways children escape from this environment is by finding a romantic partner. And unfortunately, because of that, they end up in trouble. And unfortunately, our POCSO Act says that below 18, there's no question of consent. So if either of the partners are below 18 years of age, it automatically becomes a case of sexual assault, even though it may have been consensual. And as a doctor, I feel it is very, very important for me to be as respectful of a girl or boy or transgender or any other gender who has ended up in a case of POCSO without realizing what it is. And I think it's important for me to give dignity and respect to that person also, irrespective of my own personal value systems. So the first thing is, let's look at a child who has come with suspected. Now, what are the things where we concerned? What are the symptoms we should worry about? You will be surprised that most children do not complain about child sexual abuse. They will keep quiet because they don't understand it. So as a doctor, one of the things we do is anticipatory guidance. Anticipatory guidance means when I talk to parents of, as a gynecologist, the parents who have delivered with me, they'll come with a 6-7-year-old children. I tell them, please name the body parts. So when you're giving the body, you say brush your hair, clean your ears, wipe your nose, brush your teeth. Like that, we name all the parts of the body, but some parts of the body we don't name. Or we call them susu, pee, and we give some different names. And invariably, the child understands this has something wrong with it. Or we use the word shame. Oh, this is shame. When a child comes in without any clothes on. And it's very important that we move away from this, because obviously, how does a child say somebody is touching my shame or chumming my pee? They can say they pulled my ear, they pulled my hair, because these are words the parents have used. So first thing in anticipatory guidance is talking to parents about speaking about these body parts in a respectful and comfortable manner, that this is part of the body and it should be treated as such. Now, when a child comes who has got recurrent urinary infections, sudden bedwetting, earlier there was no bedwetting till about 3, 4, 5, and suddenly after 6, the child starts bedwetting. If the child is having nightmares, chronic abdominal pain, which does not seem to have any reason, ultrasound is done, stool examination, urine examination, all other tests are done, and still the child has abdominal pain. Unwilling to go to school, fear, doesn't like to sleep with the light off, wants to sleep with the parents, suddenly says, no, I want to sleep with the parents, I don't want to sleep alone, I want to sleep with the parent. All these things are points which should give us a concern. Again, Dr. Ashok had mentioned the adverse childhood experiences. Sexual abuse is not the only adverse childhood experience. You can have physical abuse. You can have loss of a parent. Sometimes a girl or a boy at 6 or 7 years has a grandparent who was very loving and caring of the child while the parents were at work, and suddenly the grandparent dies. This itself can be very traumatic for the child. It could cause bedwetting, it could cause nightmares, it could cause fear. So we have to look at it in a holistic manner. Not everything is child sexual abuse, but please keep the high index of suspicion available that I need to ask about these questions. Now, when you are asking questions about this to a child, it's very important to have somebody the child trusts in the room with you. Please don't talk to them alone unless they are an adolescent. Teenagers sometimes prefer to talk about it in the absence of the parents, again, because they feel judged. But otherwise, it is good to have the parent there. But I sometimes tell the parents quietly, I will be asking the child some questions. Even if you feel the child is answering wrongly, incorrectly, please don't correct the child. I will speak to you later and you can tell me what is actually happening. But let me talk to the child comfortably in whatever ways possible. I don't start with is somebody touching you, is somebody troubling you. I start with which school do you go to, which class are you in, who's your favorite teacher, what's her name, what's his name, what's your favorite subject, which games do you like to play, and then slowly come to who's the person you like a lot, who gives you hugs, who's a person you don't like, who scares you a little bit. And then slowly, especially the child is over 7 or 8, talk about, sometimes people, trouble children because they're bigger or they're stronger. And sometimes they give chocolates and all and say, you know, it's a secret, don't tell anybody. But sometimes you may feel uncomfortable about it. And because you're a small child, you cannot fight these people. But if you tell somebody, I'm sure somebody would be willing to help you. And so even if you can tell me, I'll be really happy to know. But if you would like to tell your parents, your aunt and uncle, your elder sister, brother, if there's somebody you trust and you would like to talk to them about it, you know, you can talk, because we all want to help children whom somebody is troubling. And so I give this sort of an outline. Now, it's very important, of course, to have somebody the child trusts in the room. And one more thing is, if a child comes with reporting sexual abuse, like the parent comes and says, this person was touched, or my child was crying, and you can make out that this is a sexual assault, the most important thing for a child is to look at your face. Now, we tend to be upset when a child is assaulted, because it makes us feel very angry and sad. So we immediately become like, oh my God, what happened? And the child looks at your face, and your face is very scary. You know, I'd like you to go home today and check your face in the mirror when you're upset or angry. It's very scary. So I would really like you to maybe not smile, but invite the child, say, oh, is that what happened? I'm so glad you told me. That's very, very brave of you. I really appreciate that. Can you tell me something more? You know, a lot of children are troubled by elders like this, but most children are very scared. They don't want to talk about it. But you are brave. I can see that. Would you like to tell me something more? And we talk to the child in a positive manner to help the child discuss. So that is the first thing, that we give the child positive strokes right through, from the time of interview, from the history taking, from the examination, and at the closure of the interview, constantly giving positive strokes to the child. Because ultimately, you know, with all our effort, we may do a good medical exam, collect evidence, we may get everything, and yet if the parents put a case and the case goes to court, it is possible that the person may be acquitted. And unfortunately, in India right now, the chance of acquittal is very high, and there's only 4 to 12% chance of a conviction in cases of sexual assault in India right now, in different states. But the fact the child should leave your clinic feeling better, feeling validated, and feeling more heard and listened to than when they came in. And if you have done that, 50% of your job is well done. Now let's examine how when the child comes in and we talk to the child. Now, most often we know that children are not aware of their body parts. So specifically, if a child is above 7 years, we can ask the children, exactly, can you tell me what happened? And usually I try not to sit directly opposite the child, because it's very embarrassing to talk about it. So I sit at the side. So I'm saying, can you tell me like this? And I'm listening to the child with my ear towards the child, rather than staring at the child directly, because as an adult, I'm scary to the child. So the child sits, and sometimes the child may want to sit on the parent's lap and talk, and that's absolutely fine, because it gives the child a certain amount of reassurance. Now, what I do with children who are smaller, I have these drawings that are called anatomically accurate drawings. I use them. So if it is a girl child, I will use this. If it's a boy child, I will use this. If the perpetrator is a male, I will use this for the perpetrator and this for the, or a female if it is a female perpetrator. Suppose a child is a boy who's come. I will show this to him and say, can you tell me the names of the body parts? So what is this? Hair. What is this? Eyes. What is this? Mouth. Fingers. Then I go here. They may say chest, navel. When I come here, they feel embarrassed. You can see their face. They go, I know. And I'm like, yeah, I know. We feel embarrassed, right? You know, if we don't wear a chaddi, we feel funny. But can you tell me what this place is called? Okay. Who gives you a bath? So they will say the mother, grandmother, father. Then you say, okay, what do they call it? And then they will use the term used in the house. It may be sisu, pee, whatever it is. We say, okay. Then we come to the legs. And then we go to the back of the body and we take this head, back, arms. Again, this part, they will be uncomfortable. And then I say, I know you feel uncomfortable, but every part of our body has an important function. And so we look after every part of our body. Every part is to be kept clean, but they are all healthy parts and nothing is bad in our body. If somebody troubles us, they are doing something bad, but our body is not bad. Same way, if it is a girl child, I would use this. And this has been a great advantage, like in a 5-year-old girl who had been assaulted by her neighbor. She was not able to express, and you know, if you know, in India, they'll say, ket kilsa, ganda kam. They will use the term for bad activity in the native language to say what was happening. So here I will say, so this girl told me, he touched me over here. Okay. And which part of his body did he touch you with? And the child said, he touched me with this hand, and with this part, he touched me over there. So I was able to write in the medical report, in my narrative, I said the child showed her private parts and showed the male private parts to say, so that's very important, because if I say something like he touched the penis to her vagina, tomorrow in the court, the defense lawyer will say, so you have said that this fellow has used his penis to touch a vagina. And the 5-year-old girl looks at him like this and says, huh? And they say, see sir, lies. This is all lies. These are lies. And so that is why it's very important that we write it in the words of the child, and we can give the anatomic diagrams. These are acceptable in court. When I have gone as an expert witness, I have used these anatomic diagrams and shown it. So on this paper, I will write the name of the FIR number, the name of the case, the date I have examined, and this will be written as part of the medical report, which I will give to the police when I give it in. Now, after the talking, one of the first things that comes in when interviewing a child is that we have to take consent. So when the person comes in, POCSO insists on consent. Over 12 years, a child can give consent for any non-invasive examination. So we take the consent of the child. Under 18, we take the consent of the parents also. So if you look at the medico-legal management, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, there is an entire booklet. You can get it online. In that, the first page is only the consent page. Now, on that consent, it's important to take the consent of any child for the examination before we start talking about the examination. And what I normally tell them, in the consent we ask, can I examine you? And when I talk of examination, the children are obviously scared. So I tell them, suppose you fell down from your cycle, or you fell from a swing, or if someone hit you and you're hurt, you go to the doctor, right? And I will give you some medicine to make the injury become okay. I will give you some tablets to make the pain go away. And within a few weeks, you will be fine. Remember, you may have fallen down, 1 month ago, 2 months ago from a cycle, you got cut, you had stitches. Can you see anything now? Nothing's there. You became okay. And so I'm giving reassurance to the child that what has happened, because unfortunately, especially with cases of sexual assault, the child somehow feels dirty. The child feels that they have somehow been permanently harmed. And as a doctor, it's my job to tell the child that this is an injury just like any other, where someone tried to harm me, has harmed me, but I will definitely recover. I have the right to recover. I do not need to feel ashamed about something I had no control over. And so just like I fell off the cycle and got hurt and I'm fine now, somebody tried to rape me, somebody molested me, I'm upset, I'm in pain, but I will become okay. And that's very important. Once I have got the consent, now one more thing is that sometimes those of you who are posted in government hospitals may get a child who is a found child, like the police or the child line has found this child and brought it, the parents are not there. In that case, nobody else can give consent for the child. Under section 8990 of IPC, if a doctor examines a person because it is important for the life of the child, we can examine the person without their consent. Like the child is bleeding or something, I can, just for the sake of saving the life of the child. But however, if the child is not in danger, I need to get consent. And it cannot be the police person or the child line person or the NGO bringing the child cannot give consent. It has to be somebody who is either a guardian or who is disinterested. So therefore, every government hospital is always advised to have a 3-person committee, usually the RMO or CMO, the superintendent, and one more person, either pediatric department or gynae department or forensic, who form a committee who can be informed by the doctor examining, the PG examining, saying, sir, this sort of a child has come. May I have permission to see the child and examine the child for the medical reasons and examine the child for that sake? You can do that. Then we start the interview for the child. In the interview for the child is very, very important how we take the history, along with using the anatomic diagrams. When I take the history, it is also going to guide my medical examination. How does that matter? First of all, a lot of people think that you have to take swabs from the vagina or swabs from the anus if the child says sodomized or raped. But this is only of value if it is within 96 hours. So I will ask the child what happened and how long ago. And if it is more than a week, or if a girl comes pregnant, that means obviously it's more than 6 weeks that she is pregnant. I am not going to sit and take vaginal swabs. I may examine to look for a sexually transmitted disease or some other infection, but I'm not going to do any genital examination unless it is medically required. Please do not take swabs when the assault has occurred 2 weeks ago, because what you're doing is putting the child through trauma. Then when you send that evidence to the forensic lab, they will come back saying, no evidence, no semen found, and immediately that becomes like a negative medical report, and that is difficult for the child to get justice in the system. So the interview is very important because we are asking the child what happened. Like, for example, a girl who was 14-year-old, she was going to school, and as she was walking down the road, there was one place where there was a short corner. So one fellow came out and he pressed her breast very hard, tried to kiss her, and when she tried to push him away, he ran off. The girl ran back home crying, and her mother went with her to the police station, and from the police station they were brought to me for medical examination. I asked the child the history. First, I calmed the child, and I supported, was very appreciative of the fact that the child had gone and told her mother, and that it was not her fault, and it was like very good that she came, because this sort of person will do it for many, many girls, not just necessarily to her. And then when I asked her the history, she told me this. Now, in the history, I only told her I would just like to check your chest to see if there is any injuries. Are you having any pain or any bruises are there? Because he had grabbed her through the clothes. So I checked her. There was a little tenderness, but there was no other pain, no injuries. So I wrote it down saying this was a history given. I did not do a genital examination. Now, when you go to court, maybe 3-4 years later, they will say, did you do a genital examination? So, and at that time, you may not remember. So it's very important that you write down, as the child is given the history that only the breasts were pressed, squeezed, and she was molested. There was no attempt to remove her clothes, and there was no other genital contact. I have not done a genital examination or taken any evidence for the same. Similarly, clothes. Now, the rules used to be olden days that we should take the clothes of the victim. The clothes of the victim are only to be taken when the sexual assault has occurred in the last few days and the child is wearing those clothes. Sexual assault is a crime which causes the person to feel very dirty. You know, when you're walking home from college and one day the bus drives past and it splashes dirty water on you, the first thing you want to do when you go home is take off those clothes and wash that mud off you. It's so much more for a child who has faced sexual assault. The first thing they want to do is take off all those clothes, wash themselves, and feel clean again. And so ask a question and don't scold them. Why did you have a bath? Why did you throw the clothes? That's not your issue. You have to say, I just want to know because we collect the clothes. If the clothes are at home, you can inform the police person who comes with the child. Please collect the clothes in the mazar when you do a thing because the clothes are at home. If the clothes have been washed, the child has had a bath, please tell the child, yes, I know. Are you feeling better? Are you feeling better now after you've had a bath? That's fine. And just write down in your notes, child has had a bath, washed the genitals, washed the area. Evidence is being collected. However, it is expected there may not be any evidence due to the activities after the assault. Now, the next thing is, who can examine this child? Now, In the Indian Penal Code, it is stated very clearly that only a woman doctor can see a girl child. However, in the POCSO Act, it's the same thing. But what we have found that in many PHCs, primary health centers across the country, there are male doctors and no female doctor is available. And there have been horrifying stories of children and women who have faced assault, being driven 100, 200 kilometers through the night, trying to find a lady doctor who may or may not do a correct examination. That's extremely traumatic. So the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has specifically mentioned in their guidelines that an attempt may be made to find a lady doctor who can come to the hospital to examine the child. However, if it is not possible, then a registered medical practitioner, male doctor, can examine the child in the presence of a female medical attendant, maybe the nurse or an intern who has to be there to be present during the examination. Plus, at all times in the examination of a child, the parent or guardian of the child has to be there during the medical examination. And we tell the children that when we examine you, your mother, father, your aunt, your grandmother, they will be standing next to you, holding your hand, and they will not go out of the room. And everything I do, I will ask your permission first. And at any point of time, if you're uncomfortable or you want me to stop, you have every right to tell me, please stop. Give me a breather. I want to take a break. Can I go to the bathroom? I tell them the bathroom is here. You may go to the bathroom if you would like. There is water if you would like to drink. Have you had your food? And take care of the personal comfort of the child. It's very important. Another thing which I found that when I was working in a government hospital is that OPDs are very undignified spaces. I'm examining somebody and somebody else just walks in saying, oh, madam, I wanted to ask you about this case. And that is unacceptable. So please see that the child is there. There is privacy in the room when you're talking to the child and the parent or the guardian. Please see that when you're examining, you specifically say, please shut the door. See that nobody comes in till the examination is over. Say it loudly so that the child hears and is reassured that you have respect for the child's dignity. Let's go on now to the examination itself. Now, as I said, it depends on the time. If the sexual assault took place 6 months ago or 3 months ago, and it is expected, sometimes it is a longer duration because children do not, unless what we read in the newspapers, you know, child raped, strangled, you know, almost burned, beaten, all these things are very, very rare. So there the child may come in a very, very morbid state. But very often, most often, sexual assault which occurs is not spoken about. So the child will have the guts to talk about it 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years later. Not immediately. And at no point should you ever say, why didn't you tell me earlier? Already the parents have said that to the child. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because the child couldn't. Because the child didn't feel anybody would believe the child. Because the child felt that when an elder does something, everybody listens to the elder. Haven't we heard all our lives, respect your teacher? If the child comes and says, today I was punished, what did you do? Who did this? We always blame the child. So how does the child know that this is different, that you will believe the child when the child talks? And unfortunately, I'm sure most of you are aware, in your own families, among neighbors, friends, they will say that, you know, when I told my parents, they said, keep quiet. Don't talk about this. This is your imagination. What nonsense you're talking. And very often they're shut down. So at all times, please do not in any way say something which is disrespectful or negative towards the experience of the child. The other thing is also in this case is the gender issues. As you are aware now, we are moving away from the binary of male and female, and we understand there are children who may be bisexual, who may be transgender, who are confused about their sexual identity. Unfortunately, because of the silence around this in our society, these children are not able to speak out. And because they are confused, they are more higher risk of getting molested, because a perpetrator often is a very smart, intelligent individual who targets the child, understands the sort of inadequacies or confusion the child feels, and picks up on that. That is why, as Dr. Ashok had mentioned earlier, a child who has behavioral issues, anger management issues, a child who has learning disabilities, all these kids are already feeling victimized by society. They are already feeling angry, upset, worried, and there they have a higher chance of being picked up. Right? Now let's go to the practical examination part of it. After I have taken the consent of a child who is over 12, and if the child and of the parent or the guardian, as long as the child is under 18, I will then go ahead with the examination. Let us presume that the child has just sexually been assaulted, within the last 12 to 24 hours. Child is still wearing the same clothes that they were molested in. What I will do first is I have a small thing which I call the medical examination box. So in that, we start off with the first thing. I will take out each part. So the first thing we have is just a simple piece of paper. On this piece of paper, the child stands or the person stands when they are removing their clothes, because we have found that suppose a child was assaulted in a park or in some other place, there may be grass, mud, which will fall from the clothes of the child as the child is undressing. And those are picked up on this piece of paper, and then we fold the piece of paper, and with the debris, it is taken and given in. The next thing we have to do is we put on our gloves. So we use this. So we have gloves, we wear our gloves, and then we examine the child. If there are any injuries, we use a measuring tape to measure and write it down. If the child has some stains like saliva, or there were bites, or there were some semen stains which were dry, we use normal saline or distilled water, wet the swab. We wet the swab and then clean it and collect it in this. As we know from Locard's principle, if two bodies come in contact, there is some crossover of material. We can use a comb to just comb the hair of the pubic area and collect the tissue and put it into an envelope, so that we know that there may be a possibility that the assailant's hair or thing may come in. So we use into the envelope the whole thing, and that is also labeled and sent. Next thing is we have scissors for matted hair. If the person says they scratch the person, we have what are known as scraping tools. So these tools, this is actually just a toothpick. We just scrape under the nails. If they have said that they have scratched the assailant, then we scrape it, take it on a piece of paper, fold a piece of paper and put it in as evidence. This can be used both for DNA as well as for identification. In case not, we can use a nail clipper. And there are tweezers over here by which we can pick up anything we see on the body. Have a syringe. Now, blood collection, we have an EDTA bulb if we need to collect the DNA, especially if it's a rape case or a pregnancy, we may need to do DNA. If there are blood marks or semen, DNA will be useful for identification. We have a sodium fluoride bulb for alcohol levels. If the child or girl or boy has said that they were fed alcohol or given something, then we collect the blood in a sodium fluoride bulb for alcohol estimation. And we have a plain bulb, which we will take for blood grouping and drug estimation if the person says that they were fed some drugs or given something else. And we have a urine pregnancy test, which we may do if the child has delay in periods. There are swab sticks over here, which we use. These are sterile swab sticks. Swab sticks are used for any swabs over the body. So if there was saliva, bite marks, we may take that, collect it. If there are semen stains from the inner thighs, if it is a case of clear penetrative sexual assault, which has occurred in the last 96 hours, then we will use the swab, and from the vagina, we will take the swab from the vagina. We may take it from the mouth of the cervix, or we may take it from the vulva and use them. If a child gives a history of oral sex, there was a 7-year-old boy who had come to me where he was sexually assaulted by a neighbor, a grown man who had pushed his penis into the mouth of the child and ejaculated inside the mouth of the child. However, when the child came to me, it was almost 2 days. Child had been constantly vomiting and washing his mouth out. You can imagine how he must have been feeling. So at that time, I used a swab to take it from the back of the oropharynx, from towards the last, behind the last molar, because you may get some substance over there. But I also mentioned that the child had vomited many times and washed his mouth out many times. So there may not be any evidence given. So therefore, the history that I have taken guides my examination. As I said, if there is no penetrative sex or the clothes, underwear was not removed, I am not going to remove, I'm not going to take swabs from there. It's also important that whatever clothes we take have a reason. Like if a girl had come with a sexual assault and there was a wet patch on her but in a few days, when it goes to FSL, 2 weeks, 6 weeks later, it will be dry. And for FSL to look through 3-4 yards of cloth will be difficult, and we may miss evidence. So wherever there are patches or a blood patch, I will mark it, and I mark it A, B, C. And I mentioned that there was a wet patch over here. So this will be specifically seen by the forensic medicine. The forensic lab will cut out that part of the cloth and utilize it. This is very important to do. There was an example of a 5-year-old child who was sexually assaulted, and her underwear, her chaddi had a blood stain there. So this was packed and sent to FSL, and unfortunately, because it was just sent as a sexual assault case, the FSL came back saying no semen. Is it the blood of the child or the assailant? Or they said, oh, you did not mention it, we didn't do it. So please be very, very clear about all the things that you have to write and request. All the swabs that you collect have to be put onto a glass slide. You can put it onto a glass slide. These are all things which are very easily available. So you put it onto the glass slide and dry it. So you put it on the glass slide, take it. You can give the swab itself, but you can also put it on the slide, dry it. All this thing has to be dried because it will take at least 2 weeks to get to FSL, by which time it will get fungus. So even the clothes, when you collect the clothes, please put the clothes on, simple stools, dry it out, air dry all the clothes, wrap each one separately, pack it and put it away. And each one has to be packed separately in a separate envelope and sealed and just labeled. And we have labels, what we have done is, as you're aware, we used to have labels for our books in school, which used to have our name and class and other sort of things. Similarly, we have these labels, which are just stickers. So here we have, say, oral swab, vaginal swab, vulval swab, semen stains, foreign material. You can use either write these ones. It just makes life easier. So when I have a hospital where this is happening, it makes it easier to have the labels because it saves the doctor's time. And then you have to put all these into a proper cloth bag, not in plastic, but into a cloth. So these green ones that we use for our couriers, similar thing, this is used. You put it inside each of them and you mark it separately. The biochemical tests and the physical tests are to be kept separately. Seal them with lac, sign across them, and then you give it in. This is the way that we would use the forensic examination material. These are all things available in any OPD. It's not rocket science. But what I need is a head and a brain which thinks, understands, evaluates, and then collects the evidence as required. Document all the evidence that you have. And if you notice, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare Guidelines has given a 16-page pro forma. 16 pages sounds a lot, but believe me, it makes my life very, very easy. I read it 5 times in the beginning, and then I could do it by, within about 7 to 8 minutes, I could fill it up. So it gives what was the history, what was the narrative. It tells me what all swabs I have collected. It's very simple. I just tick, yes, taken, not taken. Why is it taken? Why is it not taken? So it makes my life much, much easier. Plus the mother thing, very one important thing is, pictures are worth 100 words. So there are a lot of pictures here. There are small line drawings. Please mark injuries. Like there was this case of a 10-year-old girl and a 9-year-old brother who had both been molested. And in these cases, we found that they had small round injuries on the body, upper body, trunk, and the inner thighs. And they also had small tramline injuries. So when we asked them, they said they were being molested by the father. The mother had died. and he was taking videotapes of sexual activity. So at that time, he used to hit them with a belt, and the buckle had cut them, and this had caused the injuries. And sometimes one of the other assaulters would burn them with a cigarette to ensure they followed this, and these were the burns they had. Now, this documentation was very important. We marked out the documentation and also showed that these injuries were, recent, within 1 or 2 months to maybe much longer than that, because the father tried to say that this was a false case foisted on him, but it was clearly shown. That this was because these were under long time, like at least 5-6 months across for the injuries. We could prove that the father had the custody of the children for the last 6 months. Nobody else had it. And therefore, definitely he was involved in some part of the causation of these injuries. So this is the way we would like to ensure that we are very, very meticulous in our writing, in our examination, and our documentation. At the end of it is the medical report. Now, the medical report has to only state certain things. Again, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare guidelines tell us, you can say there were physical injuries, there were no physical injuries. You can say there was, if there is injuries like laceration, bruises, burn, please write them down, all of them in detail. But if there are none, you can say no physical injury seen. You can say no evidence of injuries. You're not saying no evidence of sexual assault. Unless you were actually standing there at the time of the assault, only then can you write, yes, there was assault, or no, there was no assault. Otherwise, your evidence cannot tell you anything other than the fact that the child gives you a history. And if you have no injuries, you say no injuries were seen. Sexual assault cannot be ruled out. Please write that. In the history of the child, if you have sufficient reason to believe the child is telling you about the sexual assault, you must write sexual assault cannot be ruled out. It makes a huge difference in the court. The other thing that some people say is this person habituated to sexual intercourse? I have actually had a doctor's report saying 6-year-old child is habituated to sexual intercourse. What are you talking about? What do you mean? There is nobody who is habituated to sexual intercourse. Some people may have had sex earlier. Suppose a woman is a 30-year-old woman with 3 children and she's raped. You're not going to say habituated to sexual intercourse. Of course, she must have had sexual intercourse. You're looking for injuries right now and you're documenting her history. And one more thing is, as a doctor, I think it's very important to document the entire history, because as a doctor, you're considered a disinterested witness. You are not interested in punishing some accused. You are not interested in helping them escape. You're not here to fight for the child's rights. You are here as a person who accurately and honestly documents everything the child has said. And that itself gives a lot of weightage to what you write. So please do that, because sometimes there may be no medical evidence. And even Supreme Court and various high courts have stated that even though there may be no medical evidence, the testimony of the prosecutrix, of the survivor, has a very heavy weightage when she is believed. And as a doctor, you will know whether she's telling you what she's saying. And I would like to, if there are any questions, I'd like to answer them. The only thing I'd like to mention here is, in some cases, 35% of POXO cases, unfortunately, are bringing in eloped children who have eloped, girls who have eloped. So 15, 16, 17-year-old girls who have run away with a boy. The boy may be the same age, maybe younger, maybe elder. You cannot disrespect this girl. For whatever reason she ran away, you do not know her family life, you do not understand her reasons, you cannot judge them. Please do not do that. That is the only thing I would ask of you. So if she says, and if she is over 12, she can give consent. If she says, I do not wish to be medically examined, you cannot force her. You cannot force her, you cannot coerce her. If you can talk to her and with care and compassion, give her the sense that you want to examine her for her own sake, for her own health, in case of, say, pregnancy or sexually transmitted disease. If you can do that and she is willing to listen to you, you are an excellent doctor. But if she is not, I'm sorry, we have failed, that she does not trust us as doctors, but she has learned not to trust anybody because she has been harassed by the police, by her parents, by false cases. When she's saying, I ran away with this boy, I don't want to stay at home. And everybody is against her. Please don't join them by being against her. That's not acceptable. Thank you. I'll close now and I'll take some questions.
Thank you, madam, giving a very detailed points regarding the child sex abuse as well as examination. I thought people were expecting a large number of slides also. Somebody was asking whether there are any slides, and I always,
Dr. Ashok, I found that whenever I used to use slideshows with my medical students, they used to fall asleep.
anyway, I think it was a very, very nice presentation. And now we can go for questions. Actually, there are one. Can you please narrate what points to be noted when dealing with a handicapped child abused by a boy or a girl? This is one question asked.
Wonderful. That's an excellent question, because as you had mentioned, Dr. Ashok, the children who have some disability or special children are facing a lot of higher risk of getting abused. Sometimes I used to be so upset that a child who's blind, or a woman who's blind, or a man who's blind has faced more sexual abuse. Sometimes they say when we're trying to cross a road, somebody will say, let me help you cross the road. They hold a person by the hand and the person is thankful to them, and they grope the person and molest the person while pretending to help them, which is so disturbing to understand that there are people willing to take advantage of someone who has, a disability. So in this case, if it is a hearing impairment, that it's very important we get a sign language person, or we take the person. Usually if a person lives with their families and they have hearing impairment, one of the family members, usually the mother, sometimes elder sister, father, brother, understands and can translate for us. Please get the person in. Take the history, because it is important we get the clear history from the person. Just trying to pretend we understand what they're saying is not okay. Of course, with people who are visually handicapped, they are able to express their feelings, talk about it and tell us, so that's easier. The difficulty is with children who have any sort of intellectual disability or they are mentally retarded. These children are the ones where it's very difficult. I've had 2-3 cases of children with pregnancy who have come, or frank sexually transmitted disease. It was detected that they had some infection in the anal area, genital area, and then they have come. We have found, say, condyloma lata, warts, or sexually transmitted disease, herpes, and realize that they have been sexually molested, where the child is not able to tell us. The idea is not to harass the child, but to support the parents in keeping the child safe. Start the treatment, because first we are doctors, we are there for the therapy of the child, and next we are in the medical legal system. But taking advantage in this case, sometimes we use child psychologists or special educators who can come in. Another thing is, because of amount of trafficking happening in India, particularly in this COVID situation, there have been a lot of child trafficking. You may get a child who speaks a different language in your home state, and in that case it's very important that we get interpreter for us who can talk to the child in their own language, particularly if the child is without a family. And the district child protection unit and the district child protection officer is meant to have a list of interpreters of at least the 14 languages in which our currency is printed. At least that 14 we should have, so that we can get somebody who will interpret for us what is exactly troubling the child. So that's the way we will do it. And again, in this case, the consent becomes an issue. We take the consent of the guardian or the parents if they are there. If there is no person, no guardian, we cannot take it from the institution where the child is. Again, a medical committee has to be installed, or which is already there, and they have to give permission for examination. If it is a pregnancy or something further, then we may need in the absence of a guardian, we may need a court order, but otherwise just the medical committee is sufficient.
Another question is from Dr. V.K. Parvati, former head of the Department of Amala Hospital. Madam asking about the safe kit for the box, whether it is available in the PHCs or community centers.
So actually, whatever I have shown you is all available in every PHC. And I actually have designed this myself, and we have given it around. It's a very simple box like this. It has all the steps, you know, consent, first aid, history, examination, evidence collection, dry wrapping, documentation, treatment. And it's a very simple thing which is given, and it has all of this. And the idea is that we can replace things because we don't need everything for every case. So having a safe kit where we waste, you know, in India, we try not to waste material. So have a safe kit which everything is discarded after use doesn't make sense. So I consider that we should use it like how we have a trolley, a casualty emergency trolley, or we have the medicine trolley in our operation theater. So you have a trolley with all the items which I have mentioned, and we take, if we need to take the blood sample, we will take it, seal it and send it away. We will have our envelopes and our, you know, things to seal the material, and we keep replacing it as we require. So therefore, just a simple, what you could call a sexual assault forensic examination trolley, if we have, is more than sufficient.
And I'm unfortunate to say that in one of the meetings, a senior administrative officer was referring about a rape kit. The term they use, I think Madam was also there at that meeting.
Yes, yes.
But they all feel that this is something related to rape. And I always, whenever I talk to people, I say it is safe kit. It is not rape kit. And we have to, I think we have to have at least a list of things what is there, what should be there in every casualties, every emergency department, so that at least they can get it in between when they come across a case. There is another question is, to be exact, should we take the swabs when there is no history as such given by LS ma'am has already clearly pointed out that depending upon the type of injury, type of activity only the swabs are to be taken.
I just like to mention here, there was a case of a 9-year-old girl who was brought in an unconscious state with frothing at the mouth in when I was doing the training in Orissa. One of the doctors mentioned this case. So they said early in the morning, the girl had gone to the bathroom, and she must have gone around 5:30, and after half an hour, about an hour or two later, her mother realized she has not come back. So the mother and father went to look for her and found her near the toilet lying down outside the toilet door, frothing at the mouth, and with the clothes a little disarrayed. So over there, snake bite is very common, and they thought this frothing in the mouth means snake bite. So they immediately picked her and rushed her to the hospital, where she was admitted in the ICU for snake bite. The doctor was excellent over there, because the ICU doctor who examined the child and they were putting the catheter into the child realized that there were tears in the vaginal area, and immediately realized this is a case of sexual assault. So they actually took swabs. They took a swab and they documented the injuries. And subsequently, because they had that history, they spoke to the parents. Parents were unaware completely, but they found out that there were strangle marks around the neck. There were nail marks around the neck. And that's when they realized that this was not snake bite, but this was a medical assault. Unfortunately, the child ultimately died, but it was the awareness. So in this case, a swab would be taken, medical evidence would have been collected, because there was a doubt about it. Though perhaps if the child had been conscious, we would have asked the child for permission and talked to the parents and explained there was a doubt like this, and that evidence would be good to be collected. For a case, another history where someone asked for many months later, weeks later, yes, this is the case you will get. Please do not put the child through, a medical examination. As a gynecologist, women hate to come for pap smears, which is for their own health. Can you imagine for a child to be, troubled like this? So what you do is talk to the child. And one more thing which I had not mentioned earlier is I always tell the child, when we do the examination, they take off their own clothes. I use a sheet for the child, and I use a sheet to cover the lower part when I'm examining the top. I always start from the nose, mouth, let me see the ears. So the child feels it's a normal examination. Don't jump to the genitals directly unless there's bleeding or pain or something. I examine the full child, talk about the teeth, ask them if they brush their teeth, ask them if they have throat pain, check the chest with my stethoscope. Then I cover the upper part of the body with a sheet and then examine the lower part. I always ask the child herself or himself or the parent to take off the clothes rather than asking the nurse to take it off themselves, because it gives them a sense of privacy. So that's how we take care that the child feels protected and comfortable.
And as doctors, we must see that the child is not traumatized more. So that there was so many incidents where the child is repeatedly examined, evaluated, questioned, and every time the child narrate or think of this incident is again a re-traumatization. So that as doctor, we should never try to do that, and we should, as I already said, it should be an empathetic way of examining a child. That should be taken into consideration.
And last thing was, if it comes weeks or months after the assault, very often I would refer to a child psychologist, an assessment, and to look at the history over there, and then talk to the child and ask their permission to talk to the parents and discuss with the parents for the future safety of the child. Plus, please understand that one abuser in a family may be abusing many children. So we also talk to the child and say that many others are also abused. It may not be just you. And by your speaking out, it helps. And again, always, encourage and thank the child for having reported it, and never let the child feel in any way ashamed or, discouraged.
I think we have covered almost all the questions. I request Sandhya Madam, she's the Pro Vice Chancellor of Jaipur University. Madam, are you hearing me?
Yeah. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes.
Unmute, please, Madam. Unmute.
No, I have done it.
Okay. Yeah. You have to unmute, Madam. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, Madam. Yeah. No, you're not audible. You're not audible. You have to
Madam, you are muted. You can unmute yourself.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Is there any internet problem? Maybe there.
We can hear you actually. I'm hearing you say hello, hello.
Yeah.
Dr. Sandhya,
Hello.
can you just check? It's showing.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, Madam.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
unmuted.
I have done it. It's showing unmute.
No, you're unmuted.
Hello.
You can talk. You can talk. You're
Yes,
unmuted.
No,
Madam.
I have done it. Yeah. Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes,
Hello.
yes, you're audible.
Yes, Madam.
Hello.
Yes, madam, you're audible.
Yeah, actually, no, I am really overwhelmed. Yeah, I'm overwhelmed by the excellent deliberation, and Dr. Sholba has covered with so much of delicacy and intricacy, the complete aspect of examination. I really appreciate her very compassionate way of dealing with the patients, and my thanks to IAP Kerala and the entire team, particularly Ashok Kumar and all your team. You have done such a wonderful job of organizing this particular webinar, and really I feel that it must have been very useful to most of the participants who have attended, and my sincere appreciation to such a fantastic deliberation. It was really indeed very good.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
If there are any more questions, if there are any more questions, you can put it in the question answers area or the chat box. I think we have answered all the questions so far.
Yeah.
Here's a question. How will you identify a child with sexual abuse if they come after 1 or 2 years?
Usually they'll come because they have reported it or they have told somebody about it. Otherwise, we may not know. Or there may be some chronic physical problems that they're coming with, where you may suddenly find out that you will say that has somebody troubled you, is someone worrying you, and then they may speak out. And the 3-4 reasons when children do speak out is when the abuser has gone away from the house. Suppose it was an uncle or grandfather and they have left the house for some time, or the child has gone to a different house, like the abuse is occurring in a neighborhood, has gone to their grandparents' house. They may speak over there because they feel they're not scared of the threat of the abuser around them. Sometimes when they go into teenage, children will come out, like the father or mother may say, what nonsense, you cannot go out at night and all, this is rubbish and all, you children are bad. And the child will turn around and say, why are you calling me bad? What about your brother or your uncle? You know, how they behaved with me. And in the teenage anger, sometimes they are able to speak out about it. And at that time, see, POCSO comes in. POCSO has no statute of limitations. So you may, if you as a doctor are informed about it, you have to inform the police. But again, it depends on the parents and the family, whether they choose to think, because very often what you will find is when you tell them that you have to inform the police, the family will run away. So please, as we speak to child psychologists, they always tell us, use the first time the child has spoken abuse to talk about healing, talk about how they can protect themselves from the abuser, and do all of it in the first meeting, because the possibility is the child won't come back. If it is a random case of reported abuse where the police are not involved, family members may not know. Because later on, if you tell the family, the child will say, no, nothing happened. Doctor is an idiot.
Okay. Another question, do we screen the victim for HIV and STD?
Again, it depends on the history. If it is just non-penetrative sexual assault, generally with girls who have been trafficked or boys who have been in a long-term or gang raped and all, we may do it. Both when they come in, plus doing HIV STD testing at the time of after assault within a week or 2 weeks doesn't work. You have to repeat it again after 6 weeks to 3 months. Only then can we know definitively. So yes, but otherwise for other cases of molestation and sexual assault where the perpetrator is known, better to test the perpetrator rather than the child.
It was an excellent session. Thank you, ma'am. The feedback is also saying that the session was very good. I mean, basically involving your experience in addition to the other aspects. So that was really good. I am sure that the PGs who attended have really been benefited by it. Thank you very much. And I must also thank Ashok Kumar for bringing this over and having this program here. It's an excellent program. Thank you, Dr. Ashok Kumar.